So let's take a look at reading from Berkeley. Spelled Berkeley, pronounced Barclay, like Charles Barkley. This is the beginning of his work of the principles of human knowledge. And if we look at the beginning, we can see that he can be classified as an empiricist. That is, that he believes that all of our knowledge comes from experience, which is, like with Locke, an explicit rejection of the doctrine of Descartes that some of our ideas are innate. So you could say that an empiricist is characterized in general by the rejection of the idea that we have any knowledge that is innate, that we are more or less the blank slates that Locke said we were. And if you look at the beginning, he shows that he's an empiricist. He says it is evident to anyone who takes a survey of the objects of human knowledge that they are either ideas actually imprinted on the senses, or else such as are perceived by attending to the passions and operations of the mind. That is, all of the ideas we have either come through the senses, through experience, or from our reflecting on the operations of our own mind. That is, as also an interior experience that we have. And that we assemble our notions of the everyday objects that surround us through these ideas. He continues, he says, by sight I have the ideas of light and colors with their several degrees and variations. By touch I perceive, for example, hard and soft, heat and cold, motion and resistance, and all of these more or less either as to quantity or degree. Smelling furnishes me with odors, the palate with tastes, and hearing conveys sounds to the mind in all their variety of tone and composition. And as several of these are observed to accompany each other, they come to be marked by one name, and so to be reputed as one thing. That is, that our notion of the objects around us is really, we assemble them. They are collections of characteristics. He gives an example. Thus, for example, a certain color, taste, smell, figure, and consistence, having been observed to go together, are counted one distinct thing, signified by the name apple. That is, what is an apple? Well, in experience, it is redness, or greenness, or yellowness, depending on the color of the apple, a certain taste, a certain odor, a certain shape, which we associate quite naturally with each other, and that is really, strictly speaking, what we experience of the apple is this collection of qualities or collection of characteristics. This is reminiscent of Locke and the rejection of the notion that we have some kind of other, what Descartes would call an intellectual intuition of the substance of the apple, of which those things are qualities. The denial that we ever have any intuition, any actual direct experience of a substance is here in Locke too, at least of a physical substance, as we'll see. Other collections of ideas, he continues, constitute a stone, a tree, a book, and the like sensible things. Okay. And then in section 2, well, of course, he says, over and above the ideas we have of the things in our experience, we have a notion of a something which knows or perceives them and exercises diverse operations as willing, imagining, remembering about them. This perceiving active being is what I call mind, spirit, soul, or myself. By which words I do not know any one of my ideas, but a thing entirely distinct from them, wherein they exist, or which is the same thing, whereby they are perceived. For the existence of an idea consists in being perceived. So I have these specific ideas that I meet with in my experience, that I have experience of, and then I have a notion of the experiencer, of the mind, of the self, of the spirit or soul, which perceives these ideas, which is distinct from the ideas. So two things that, of course, come up in any empiricist discussion, or one thing, let's say one prominent thing in every empiricist discussion, is what is the relation, if any, between these ideas that I have, which are entirely subjective experiences, which goes back to the Cartesian stance in the meditations, where I consider all of my ideas simply as ideas, not as relating to anything that transcends my ideas or is distinct or independent from my ideas. But the question then comes up, what is the relation between these ideas and the things they seem to be ideas of in the world? Berkeley has a certain answer to that. He says, this is in section 3, the table I write on, I say, exists. That is, I see and feel it. I do. And if I were out of my study, I should say it existed, meaning thereby that if I was in my study, I might perceive it. That is, what does it mean to say that Berkeley, I think, is saying, what does it mean to say that the table would exist, or the table does exist, even if I'm not in the room to see it or experience it in any way? He says, what I mean by that is that if I was in my study, I might perceive it. Or that some other spirit actually does perceive it, or some mind, whether it be an individual like me or even the mind of God, is perceiving it. That's what I mean to say that it exists. If it exists, it's either being perceived or might be perceived by me. There was an odor, that is, it was smelled. There was a sound, that is to say, it was heard, a color, a figure, and it was perceived by sight or touch. This is all that I can understand by these and the like expressions. For as to what is said of the absolute existence of unthinking things, that is, the physical substance or material substance, the unthinking extended substance that Descartes talked about, for as to what is said of the absolute, the independent existence of unthinking things, without any relation to their being perceived, that seems perfectly unintelligible. Their esse is percepi, that is, their existence is being perceived, nor is it possible they should have any existence out of the minds or thinking things which perceive them. That is, if all my experiences of ideas, basically, either of the impressions of the senses or the recollections in memory and imagination, those ideas, being ideas, have no existence other than through being thought. That is, they would not exist. They could not have any exist outside of being thought. And so Berkeley is thinking these ideas are entirely dependent upon mind thinking them for existence. Their existence is to be perceived. If they are not perceived, they do not exist. And what do we gather from that? Well, Berkeley concludes something really radical. He says, sorry, check the time here. He says, continues section 4, it is indeed an opinion strangely prevailing amongst men that houses, mountains, rivers, and in a word all sensible objects have an existence natural or real, distinct from their being perceived by the understanding. But with how great an assurance and acquiescence soever this principle may be entertained in the world, that is, that there are physical substances that are independent of my ideas of them, Yet whoever shall find in his heart to call it in question may, if I mistake not, perceive it to involve the manifest contradiction. For what are the forementioned objects but the things we perceive by sense? And what do we perceive besides our own ideas or sensations? And is it not plainly repugnant that any of these, or any combination of them, should exist unperceived? That is, if everything in my experience is an idea of some sort or another, that is, what Descartes would say, a mode of my mind, then I have no experience whatsoever of these so-called physical things that somehow are the source of these ideas. I have no experience whatsoever. And in fact, it seems, he says, absurd. It involves contradiction. He continues in number 5, a little bit farther down. Light and colors, heat and cold, extension and figures, in a word, the things we see and feel, what are they but so many sensations, notions, ideas, or impressions on the sense? And is it possible to separate, even in thought, any of these from perception? For my part, I might as easily divide a thing from myself. So what is the conclusion here? Well, what he's driving at is that there's no such thing as material substance. That all we have is our experience of ideas, and the notion that somehow or another there is over and above, transcending these mental objects or ideas, some physical substance which is the source of them, is nowhere in our experience, and in fact we have no experience of it whatsoever.